My research pointed to this hustle culture that keeps us trapped, and we are constantly looking for worth outside of ourselves. We're hustling every day. We're thinking that that 25th hour is right around the corner. And if we can actually shift our relationship with that and change some of our mindsets and behaviors, then we have a much better chance of moving out of survival mode and into thriving in our life and our work.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Hart Inspired, the show dedicated to highlighting individuals in their pursuit of authentic leadership. We peel back the layers to uncover the roadblocks we all face, explore the actions we can take, and how to persevere towards the best version of ourselves. It is my hope that you'll be inspired by their story and gain some insights to help you in your own journey. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to Hart Inspired. We have another wonderful show for you today. This series is about women in leadership, and I am really excited with my next guest, Jennie Blumenthal, who's joining us today. Welcome, Jennie.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
A passionate subject of mine is talking about how we are powerhouses, we are badasses, we do it all, right? And we juggle a lot of things in the air. We've kind of all started in our corporate America careers thinking that that was going to be all the end all and that, we're going to retire from this doing fabulous things. But then something happens called burnout and exhaustion, right? And so I would love to hear your journey, how you transitioned from having that to now thriving in a wonderful business of your own. You're an author and all those other good things, and we'll get into that. But Jennie, share with us your story a little bit about how you went from corporate America and what that was like to finally realizing, yeah, this isn't the path for me.
Sure, Michelle. Yeah, it really started, I think, with me being raised with a very strong work ethic. My parents are both teachers. I grew up on a farm. And so I had this, mentality, particularly from my paternal grandmother, who really focused on if you work and you have ambition and you apply that to the things that are important, you'll be able to take care of your family. She was raised in the Depression, so we can see where a lot of those hard values really honed by grit came from. And she was a huge influence on me. And I carried that right into the work world and, was raised by a mom who said, you can be anything you want to be and more than the three careers that I was able to do. Or three choices in a career. And so I kind of went into the world almost a little bit with blinders on of I'm going to get to the top of this corporate ladder. And I don't really know what's waiting for me there, but I know that's what I'm supposed to do. Right. And I think all for the best of intentions, probably in all parties. And really what happened to me is that as I climbed that ladder, I just kept my head down and I figured the harder I worked, the work would speak for itself. I'm very personable, but now understand that I'm a people pleaser. And so there's very much this, grit and determination, but also kind of enveloped in this, I want, to be liked and respected. And so that really worked in my career. And it worked for a lot of other people too, because I made a lot of other people successful as I was succeeding and really cared about my teams and didn't, wanted them to be happy individuals. And it really took me getting to the pandemic to stop. And when my world got quiet, it gave me a chance to kind of look within. And for a little context, when the pandemic hit, I had reached what I thought was really, a pinnacle in my career. I had made partner at a big global management consulting firm. I was the only woman on our leadership team leading a business unit of $300 million. I was leading about 250 people. I had the husband with his own career, the two kids, the dog, the house, I had the whole thing that I thought I'd been striving for, but I was also on planes 3 times a week. And I really was out there hustling because I was trying to do all the things that I thought I was supposed to do to keep everything working. And when the pandemic hit and planes were grounded and the 4 of us with the 5, I guess, with a dog, were in this house all together, all of a sudden the cracks in the relationships that I had, or the things that I was doing to keep me busy on the surface, but not understanding the depth beneath those relationships really came into very sharp focus. And I realized that one of the biggest relationships I had neglected was the one with myself, where I was constantly trying to chase somebody else's definition of success. I was taking the next step on the ladder that someone else had put out for me, as opposed to really going within and understanding, what do I really enjoy? What lights me up? And how can I apply these talents that I have towards the things that I think are really meaningful? And so that really started me down this leadership path where I thought I had it was the end of my leadership journey. And thankfully, I now realize it was the beginning of really, charting my own path and actually growing exponentially as a leader after I left.
We talk about the pandemic. You mentioned that, all five at home where you can really reflect, right? So lots of thoughts. And did you miss the traveling? Like, was it a relief or was it a loss?
That's a great point. I think it was both. I think where I had evolved to now knowing this in hindsight, it wasn't realizing it at the time, but to make my life work, I just pushed away the negative emotions or the sad emotions or the frustration. And there's no use, dwelling on this. This is what it takes to get it done. Just get on the plane and make the sale and come back. And I didn't realize I was operating on a really small amount of capacity when you think about it, what the human person can take on and what a leader can embody is this massive amounts of emotions and mental and body and physical, all kinds of things you can do. And when you think about it, even though I was held up as the example of like the pinnacle of what we should all go for, because I was, held up as a role model to a lot of people, I was operating in a very thin amount of my capabilities. So I'd answer that honestly, I had both. I had loss because I, enjoyed some of the travel. But I also had this newfound hope that maybe this was, the answer of how I was going to make it all work. And I think if you would have interviewed me 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, I would have said the quintessential quest that I was on is to find that elusive 25th hour of the day. And it was just around the corner. And, I could enjoy my life if I could just hire that next person, if I could just close this last deal, next month will be easier. And I didn't realize I was just stuck in this pattern that I couldn't shift out of for a lot of reasons. And it had helped me get to certain places, but was holding me back to get to others. So I think it was both, although I didn't really realize it at the time.
Lots of loss and lots of gifts were given during that pandemic and
Yes.
sitting at home, binging on Netflix or whatever we were all doing. You mentioned that the biggest relationship, I want to go back to that. You mentioned the biggest relationship that you were not taking care of or nurturing was yourself. Did you feel that in the job there weren't many people who felt that for you either, that they weren't like, Jennie, how are you? What do you need? Did you get that nurturing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say yes and no. The problem, I think, with the nurturing that was around pre-pandemic, it was very, hey, watch out, was the type of nurturing I received. Hey, don't take too many trips. Hey, make sure that you're around enough for your kids. But the challenge was, as I saw it, there was a structural challenge and then there was the internal challenge. The structural challenge was that all the jobs that were set up, and this is largely true for a wide swath of corporate America, are set up for single earners who are working 60 hours a week where someone else is a caregiver, full stop, right? So there is not an infrastructure that's in place for someone to find a job that gives you the prestige, that gives you, enough salary, let's call it that, and lets you keep chasing ambitious goals, however you define that, and also live out those other dimensions of your life. So in the company I was in, there was one path to the top. And if you couldn't, quote, hack that path, then you went into an internal role, or you maybe in the 80s, we would have called mommy tracked. Now we call it, we move somebody into an internal role and we wish them well, but we know that they're never really going to progress on the path that the cool kids are, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the structural piece. Internally, I also held that limited belief that if I couldn't do it, then I couldn't hack it. So when someone said like, hey, be careful, it was almost a threat of, oh, he doesn't think I can do it. Well, let me show him.
Yeah.
And she thinks I'm going to cave. Well, I'm not going to cave. I'm getting on that plane,
Yeah.
And so I think we do this to ourselves. And that's really where I get into a lot of in the book and in coaching that I wound up, writing and launching with my company, shifting these mindsets and patterns. And the first step is becoming aware of them. I had no idea that I was out there trying to prove myself to everyone, when really what I needed to do was ask myself what I wanted and be okay with that answer. And so I think it was a little bit of both. I got the support, but the support looked like, hey, are you on strategy and on message? And if you're not, get out of the way. And if you are, great, you're invited to the cool kids table. And I think we need changes in both the structural and the individuals in terms of mindsets and patterns.
And so now you are, 2020 happened, you've now transitioned to become an entrepreneur. So clearly we see what the signs were that had you transition to that. What was it like when you, as they say, hung your shingle outside as an entrepreneur? What was that like for you? Freeing? Was it, aha and scary? Tell us what was going through your mind.
It was definitely both. And first, I'll be really transparent. I did a lot of healing in the middle of it. So I
Mm.
left and I did about 6 months of just work on myself, of going to therapy for the first time in my life, actually like rediscovering what lights me up, because I honestly had no idea. Here I was 42 years old and I couldn't tell you what I'd like to do with an hour of my time if I happened to have a free moment. And so I spent my time really throwing myself back into whatever seemed to be interesting. I tried poetry, I did gardening, I tried adult ice hockey, which I still do and love.
Oh
But
my
all
goodness, we're going to
things,
have to come back to that.
yeah, exactly. But all these things that kind of wake my soul up from this place where it felt like it had been trapped for a while. And again, both from the environment I was in and from my own doing. And so that was kind of the step number one. And then as I came out of that, things actually started to happen a little organically. I took the advice of Glennon Doyle, whom I adore, that just do the next right thing. It's also part of the soundtrack of Frozen 2 for those of you who want to have the Disney version. But really, that message kept coming back and again, just do the next right thing, and the path is going to start to open up in front of you. And as I started talking about my experience and saying, hey, this is how I really felt. And for the first time, I felt like I could be honest about how hard it was without worrying whether I was going to get, passed over for promotion or branded as difficult. I had so many women just coming out of the woodwork saying, gosh, me too. I had no idea someone else felt that way. And so at first it felt freeing because I could
Mm.
actually speak the truth. And it felt very validating because I felt like I was being seen for the very first time by other women and I was seeing them in return. And so that felt very fulfilling. To be totally transparent, I think I hid behind that year I was writing this book because I wasn't intending to do that. But as I went through my own process and started to delve into the research of what actually makes people tick and the definition of self and how do you actually look for purpose and what's the neuroscience of leadership and how does trauma interact? And as I learned all these things, I thought, oh my gosh, we don't know this, at least as Americans. This is not something that we're taught in school. I had kids in elementary school at the same time and thought, boy, they should be learning this alongside history and everything else. And so that's really what started the book, is I just had so many people that were like, tell me, how can I avoid burning out like you did? Or what did you learn? And so I just started putting that together and that became the book. And then I had these women saying, oh my gosh, me too. And I started capturing their stories. And that turned into 300 executive women lending their stories to the book, which again, wasn't even intended. So I think at first it was really organic and uplifting from that piece, and also really hard and isolating when you go out on your own. And it wasn't until the book was published, which was October, and then I had to say, okay, where do I want to really focus? That then again, the fear crept back in of like, okay, what am I really going to do this and lean into this? And if so, then I really have to put the skin in the game. And that's a little scarier than just taking inbound calls. So I think all of the above. I think my emotions were fear, excitement, exhilaration, sadness, frustration, joy. And that's probably the way I would describe the life of an entrepreneur.
Yes, I can agree with you there. So you went from 60, 70 hours a week, 3 times on a plane, corporate America, rising the ladder, to definitely a different pace, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Even though you're wearing all the hats,
Yeah.
it's a different pace, right? You
Yeah.
get to call the shots, you get to run your own hours and choose who you want to work with and how you work with them.
That's right.
With that, what are some of the lessons that you learned from corporate America that are really valuable? Obviously, not being on a plane for, and you got this, and no
Right.
nurturing involved there. But what are some of the lessons that you learned that really help you in your business today?
Well, I would say there's a couple of things. That the first is there's a lot of functional skills that you can take from corporate America, whatever you did with your day job, that totally translates into entrepreneurship or into another role or
Yep.
another job. I happen to sell technology and was actually the business side of technology, so kind of taking the customer's needs and matching that up with what we needed to do from a technology perspective, which really meant creating new products and services all the time, being on the cusp of what the customer trends are, what do people actually need, and how can we position what we do to meet that. And I use that every day. I'm constantly sensing the market and figuring out what's the state of women in the workplace today, and what do we have as in our toolkit as corporate America to help them, and what's missing. And then I try to stand in that gap or get other people to help me stand in that gap to fulfill some of those needs. So I would think that's the number one, is whatever your day job is going to teach you some very functional skills that you can use. But the second thing I think is all of the unwritten rules of corporate America, a lot of them still apply when you're outside. So the trite example of your net worth is your network, those types of things, or make sure you're managing your network, is very true, because I find that often there's people that I already know that can help me. Often what I'm doing more of in this phase of my life is actually making more deposits. I had such little time that I operated my life on in the past that I'm now making a conscious effort that I take, 2 days a week, and I have a group of other women that we're all in a pod together. We all amplify each other's voices in their social media channels, or cheer them on if they're doing something. And I look for people who I know could benefit from the platform that I have or the network that I have, and I try to invest in them and trust that, it just lifts all boats without trying to make it this transactional thing or operating from a source of scarcity, which unfortunately, I believe scarcity is the currency of corporate America today, and that needs to shift, right?
100%, yeah.
So we're in this position where, geez, why did I feel like I was only as good as my last deal? Because I was. Because you look at the deals and the layoffs and the things happening today, you need to look no further than the headlines to know there's a significant problem that we have, that the way we work doesn't work. And so when I think about that piece, your network is portable. And I really think that's one of the biggest things that has been not written about within the pandemic. Part of the reason our mindsets shifted, absolutely, we have to put mental health on the table, and the fact that there was so much fear, there was actual real death from a pandemic. That's all going to make us feel like we're in scarcity and fear and survival mode. But the transparency that we all gained from, you're not just finding out what happened to somebody by the water cooler. Now you only find out if it's broadcast on LinkedIn or it's in a headline. So in some ways that information was democratized in a way that wasn't available when we were in a physical and digital world. And I think that's gone a long way towards people saying, hey, my network is actually portable. My network defines me and not necessarily the company I came from. I think that's actually really hopeful. And I think that I've carried that lesson from corporate America into my life as an entrepreneur, but I've made sure that I'm at the center of it, as opposed to a company or a boss being at the center of it, which I would recommend for everyone if you're going to be the author of your own life.
That's so insightful. Really great tips. What are some of the things that you would leave behind from corporate America? Lessons that were just bad idea.
I'm not sure we have enough time to cover that.
There'll be a part two.
Well, yes, we already covered the scarcity model, and I think we all buy into it for a lot of reasons. And in my coaching, and even in the book too, I talk about this an awful lot, that, trauma plays a huge role in this. All of us have had some exposure to something in our lives that said, ooh, I better change who I am to fit in, or I better not do that activity again if I want to be promoted, for example. And I think I really would love to have trauma-informed workplaces and bring healing to the C-suites of corporate America, and leave behind this very narrow mindset that the 6'1" white guy that pounds on the table the hardest and is always closing is the only way to lead. Because unfortunately, you look at the demographics of Fortune 500 companies, that's still what we're saying by default in terms of who we have leading corporate America. And not to say that, don't misunderstand me, that doesn't mean all white men over, 5'11" are terrible. What it means is that there's multiple dimensions to the way that we lead. And right now we have a very, white male centric, power focused, version of that. So I really would love to leave that behind. And that infuses everything. That's why we reward the rainmaker who's a total jerk, but makes the numbers. That's why we raise our expectations for, one of the quotes in the book, a woman said, I knew I was in trouble the day that we announced that we were going to have additional mental health benefits that we could now apply for this year. And in the very same email, my company raised the utilization targets, making us work an extra 10 hours of work a week. And it's like left hand, right hand. We don't understand the connection between these two things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think I would broadly say the way we work doesn't work. And I would like to leave that behind. And I think the very male dominated, and there's tons of research on this, it's actually the wounded masculine that's leading corporate America. It has nothing to do with gender. If you think about both of us, both gender, everyone having male and female energy and leadership styles available to them, but that we just assume a man is going to act one way and a woman's going to act another way. If you're assuming there's just, two gender models. I think the challenge is this wounded masculine, and I could name a couple of names that are in the headlines that you would identify with immediately.
Yes.
I'll let your listeners fill the blank, where, you charge hard and that's the way good work gets done. And this is the only way to be, needs to be softened with, a different approach. And I would hold up, for example, even though she happens to identify as a woman, Jacinda Ardern is a great example of someone who's really tough on certain things, where she believed that gun control was important to her country and she pushed for that immediately, but is also really empathetic and was really very sensitive to the cultural realities in the Christchurch incident and made sure that she led with both. And I think that's a great example of somebody who, embodies both of those energies. That's what I'd see us like. I'd like to see us move towards that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that even for women who are in the leadership role, don't lose sight of your soft side. You don't have to lead the same way a male has to lead. I think the whole bully approach, or you will do what as I say, that really has to be squashed. It really has to be reevaluated. So really great points.
Yeah, I was listening on a discussion with Carla Harris the other day, and she made a great point that people lead the way they were led. And if you think about it, it makes total sense, right? That we grow up and we do things based on the values that were instilled in us, unless, something else changes. It's no different within our leadership styles. If you were in a command and control situation, and your boss was maybe somebody who was in a role for 30 years and got the gold watch at the end of the job, and that's all they knew, and you listen because that's what you need to do as a good employee, well, then that person grows up and they're a boss. How are they suddenly supposed to develop a whole new leadership mindset? They can't, right? Yeah. So we're seeing that a lot right now too, with multiple generations in the workplace, and hopefully that is something that will start to shift too.
That's why corporate America needs coaches like us.
Yes. This is true.
To help them transform a little bit and understand that there is another way of looking at things and not being so hard. There's a quote by, I think it's James Clear, who said, "Great leaders have those who follow them. Bad leaders have those who obey them," or something to that effect. So that's pretty powerful when you can have a leader who has a little bit of both.
Right.
A well-rounded and seasoned one. So tell us a little bit more about your book. Did you gather all these interviews and stories? And what is the name of the book?
The book is called Corporate Rehab, Ditch the Hustle Culture and Thrive Again. And it's focused really on the process that I took to understand what was actually happening and why I had stayed in a situation that was maybe I had either outgrown or wasn't good for me. And my research pointed to this hustle culture that keeps us trapped. And we are constantly looking for worth outside of ourselves. We're hustling every day. We're thinking that 25th hour is right around the corner. And if we can actually shift our relationship with that and change some of our mindsets and behaviors, then we have a much better chance of moving out of survival mode and into thriving in our life and our work. And so it takes my story and it weaves that throughout the book. But then I was really, being a reformed consultant for 20 years, I was very intent on making the data, make sure that I had enough to back up my lived experience. And I wanted to make sure that I got others. And so as women started reaching out, I gathered 300 other women's stories and put that throughout the book, but then always also backed it up with neuroscience of leadership, the latest on neuroplasticity and what we can do to actually rewire our brains, trauma and the impact of that, which I think there's just amazing research that's been done only in the last 2 years, really, on the impacts of that and what that means in terms of the workplace. and your ability to heal some of that. And then went through a lot of the different modalities too, mind, body, and spirit, to really give something that felt holistic, but that's grounded in data. And so I came up with my rehab leadership framework. So the rehab actually stands for recognize, is the first step, where you actually recognize your life story and understand what made you you. Evaluate is where you really start to identify the patterns and the mindsets, the thoughts that you have today, your relationships, your time, the way things are, so that you can understand what is. Heal is for H, going across mind, body, and spirit. Arise is that A, where you get to actually reconnect with yourself, right? When you've changed that relationship with the hustle culture, you're reconnecting you and tap into your own strengths, add back the play and the fun that we get to do when we're not hustling for our worth 4 hours a day. And then B stands for build, building these new dimensions in your life and your work that work better for you and that are more intentionally designed to help you thrive instead of being stuck in survival mode. So that's the book. It's on Amazon or anywhere you buy your books, and I'm really excited about it. It's been really fun to get to launch that. There's been amazing response to it. It became a bestseller the day it was released, which is really exciting. So I'm really excited to talk about it.
Oh, that's awesome. We'll make sure the information and the name of the book will be in the show notes. Love that you went from that to entrepreneur to author. You're a keynote speaker. You are an adjunct professor. You are a busy lady for sure. And I think you replaced the 3 trips in the air with a lot of other good things. So, and
Yes.
spreading such great message. With the work you're doing today, what do you believe are some of the initiatives that women should be focusing on for 2023?
What's the future of work going to look like, and how do we set up leaders to thrive? We're seeing, the same stats that we're all tired of seeing are still here, unfortunately. So 77% of all people right now feel like they're still in burnout. So 77 is a huge number. Engagement is super low. We're seeing 32% of employees actually saying that they are engaged at work, and 2/3 of your teams are not. So when you put those things together, we're still dealing with these after effects of 2 years of unpredictability and uncertainty, and people are kind of like trotting to the beginning of 2023 already a little depleted.
Yeah.
And so I say that because I think it's important, before we start the new year, new you stuff for 2023, that we really think about, we are those same people, and a lot of us feel really depleted already. So the initiatives I see women taking on, and companies that are calling me every day about this, are things like, help us understand, how we can actually set up our leaders to reach the next level that we need them to get to without losing themselves in the process. So what would it look like to thrive? If we're looking at all of these different policies or different, ideas, how can we rank those and think about what would make the actual, the most importance? And I like to think of it, I have this in the book, where we've got Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where if you're going from survival on the bottom and moving up this hierarchy, it takes, esteem, purpose, connection to get up that hierarchy. Anybody who's listening, who's in that role of trying to set up your own women's network, or thinking about what you're doing for high potential talent, I'm getting a lot of those calls too. Anything you're doing, run it through that filter of, is what you're doing helping people move up that curve? Are they feeling valued? Are they feeling connection? Are they feeling purposeful about their work? Not your company. Your company can have its own purpose, but how can they reconnect the purpose that they feel to the day-to-day job, and run it through that filter to make sure that you're, really giving them something that actually enables them to take back and be more empowered in their career. Because I think it's really interesting, as we think about that shift in power, it's not just the seesaw of, do the employees have power, and so the employers are scared, or do the employers have power and the employees are scared? How can we empower each other so that people can take responsibility for their own career and their own lives and have the tools to do so? So that's really where I see a lot of women focusing this year. And it's things like, they built a women's professional network last year. This year, they're taking and investing in the learning and development funds to create more, live experiences, women's retreats, things that are actually invested specifically in their advancement. I'm actually taking the book to one company, and we're doing a whole training program that we're kicking off on International Women's Day, just on how can you upskill the women in your company to actually be resilient and face this huge amount of growth that we're all looking at, that people want, but they're already walking into it depleted. And so that's really where I see a lot of the women focusing for the year ahead.
Oh, that's really great. And when you're walking into that as emerging leaders, young leaders, or even established leaders, you need that recharge. Sometimes we stay in that same playing field and we just, blinders on, right?
Right.
And so taking the blinders off, that's really great. What are some of the personal initiatives or professional initiatives that you are focusing on for 2023? Because what you just mentioned is all great. And what we hear is that you're filling somebody else's cup because you are helping them. So what are you doing, Jennie, to fill your own cup?
Yes, great question. Well, I'm still, to kind of go back a couple of questions to your point, I'm still trying to balance what I take on with the other roles that I want to live in my life. So I am playing on an adult ice hockey,
Yes.
league every week, and I need to make sure I have time for that. I've also got 2 teenagers in my house and a husband with his own career, and I'm rebuilding all of the relationships with those people too. And, I'm realizing that unfortunately, there's a lot of time within the teenager span that's a lot harder than the toddler span. And so there's a decent amount of my day that goes to carpools and all of those types of things, just to be around as the shorter people. Well, I shouldn't say that for much longer. I'm probably the shortest person in my house at this point, but while the younger people in my
except for the dog.
Yes, that's true. I still have him. But honestly, just being there and being available as they're in these really formative years, and just like when you think babies will never get older, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get my time back. These kids are going to be out of my house in 5 and 7 years. And so I'm grateful for being really present. And I mentioned that because part of my intentionality about my career and my company this year is making space for all of the different roles I want to take on. And that's a really important one to me. On the work front, I've got a lot of exciting things going on. Some partnerships with other female funded businesses where we're trying to actually band together as we're investing in other female businesses. I'm going to be launching a course on corporate rehab and thrive so that more people have access to the content in addition to the one-on-one coaching and group coaching that I already offer. So I'm really excited about that. And then doing a ton of keynotes and corporate presentations. So I'm excited about where those all go, and looking forward to, trying to balance all of that this year while still really enjoying my life. So that's my goal for 2023.
Those are great goals. And I love the fact that you are really being intentional about balancing your work life, your family life, because that became very important for me once I stopped working in corporate America. Like, the family became the priority versus the other way around. So we'll make sure that all of your information is in the show notes, but if you could tell our audience, where can they find you, and are you on your website? Where can they contact you?
Yeah, best place to go is the website. It's www.corporate-rehab.com, and you can get free worksheets on there. You can see the coaching packages, the speaking opportunities, all of that is linked in there, and you can even buy the book there. And then I'm also pretty prolific on LinkedIn, so I try to focus most of my attention there, since that's where most of the leaders that are trying to thrive are posting about this. But unfortunately for my teenagers, I'm also on TikTok and Instagram. So you can find me at any of those places.
I have one last question for you. You did touch upon it. You talked about the mental health and how important that is, and balancing it, and that we do need more of that in the workplace, physically and emotionally, for sure. What do you see in the work that you're doing with initiatives on DEI? Do you still see it as people are checking off the box, or are they really being intentional about having a program that is a journey, because there is no end to it?
What I see is maybe a tale of two cities, because I do see a number of companies that say, we did the DEI thing, we've done all of the best practices, we checked all the boxes, it should work now. And if it doesn't, then, the people involved are the ones that are just complaining too much or fill in your favorite excuse. I'm still hearing that a little bit. What I'm hearing a lot more of, though, is this gap between the knowing that you should be doing something different and the feeling and the understanding of the skills and embedding it in the culture. And I think that's the next big place to really explode, where we see, a little bit more of the practicality and some immersive experiences, all kinds of cool things happening in this space, where we're thinking about, corporate well-being and DEI coming together, and it really, coalesces into how do we make our cultures more human? Yeah. And, what are the specific things that we can do? And that means you're creating a culture of belonging where everybody belongs, as opposed to having to have this culture where people don't belong and then include them and they both belong, right? And I think that's where we're getting to. But right now, I think back to my consulting days, we're in the forming, storming, norming of that, solution where people are just not sure, what exactly to do. In fact, I had one company reach out and said, we don't even know the language we're supposed to be using. We don't even, we're not even sure. And it tells me they earnestly want to change behaviors, but they know they can't just, read a post and slap it, send it around and they're done. So I really do see people in earnest struggling to figure out, how do you create these cultures of belonging as opposed to just being inclusive of others. And so I think that's really where the future is going to head. And I'm excited. I'm here for it.
Yeah, me too. Well, Jennie, thanks again. This has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the show and being a guest. You've brought so much value to what we're supposed to be focusing on, what we should be focusing on. And, not everything is perfect in a, nice box with a ribbon around it, but all the deposits we make should be positive, right? In our own lives and in others' lives. So thanks again for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And all the best to you and your book.
Thanks so much, Michelle. I really appreciate you having me. Thanks for sharing your platform with me as well.
Be well.
Thank you again for listening. We'll be back soon with a brand new episode of the Hart Inspired podcast. Until then, I'm your host, Michelle Delgado. I welcome you to support the show by rating us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. To learn more about Hart Metrics Consulting, book a strategy call by visiting the website at hartmetrics.com.